Welcome you all here to Confluences community gathering and symposium. Thank you for braving the weather, the parking, the construction, everything it took to get here. My name is Andrew Kear. I'm Senior Curator and Head of Collections, Exhibitions, and Programs here at Museum London. Most knowledge, certainly the knowledge most meaningful to human flourishing and coexistence, is situated knowledge. It emerges from contingencies rooted in a place. I want to suggest to this room that the dialogues that unfold here today and tomorrow, the knowledge and stories we share, will be shaped not only by where each of us has come from, but where we are. The banks overlooking the Descanzibi, a place steeped in history and meaning within the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wack, Adawandron, and Wendat people. Museum London sits within the homeland of the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. London remains home to a diverse Indigenous urban population who contribute to shaping and strengthening this community and this museum. Gathering here should humble and exhilarate each of us, wherever we're from, reminding us that every day we live our lives on Indigenous land. In case you weren't aware, events today and tomorrow represent something of a culmination of GardenShip and State, the title of an exhibition mounted here at Museum London in 2021 that brought together the work of a diverse group of 20 artists and writers from across Turtle Island. But of course, GardenShip and State is more than an exhibition. It's really more than a project. I was trying to think of a word to describe and I think it has to be said as something more like a shared journey, something I think the proceedings today and tomorrow will make abundantly clear. I want to acknowledge, thank, and congratulate the organizers and co-curators, Patrick Mann and Jeff Thomas, for their creative and collaborative vision, for their brain cells, and dare I say, blood, sweat, and tears. The team of artists, activists, community leaders, professionals, and academics behind this dynamic duo must also be commended. Managing a project that engages community so thoroughly and authentically requires emotional energy, patience, and organizational skill. To be meaningful, GardenShip and State was always going to be anything but easy. Well done. I'd now like to invite Jeff Thomas to introduce today's event. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I was thinking about how I wanted to introduce myself to the audience and about the project and the work that Patrick and I put into this. And I was thinking about something that took place about 2007, I think it was, 2005. And when Patrick approached me about the project a few years ago, I was a bit hesitant because I thought, well, what do I bring to it in terms of environment? And at that time, I wasn't sure how I would fit into the project. And so I had to do a lot of searching and thinking about my role as first as an invited artist, then as Patrick's co-curator. Over a period of time, I introduced the concept of the two-row treaty and its enduring life for Haudenosaunee people and for me and for the way that I was raised and taught by my elders. But there was one event that took place in 2005 that I looked back on and thought, wow, this is really the basis for what I was going to bring to the project. It took place when I was driving on the 401. Well, actually, I was driving from Ottawa to the McMichael collection, and I took Highway 7 and heading west. And it wasn't long before the Peterborough exit that I noticed that I was started running into monarch butterflies, and they were going right across the highway, and I was so distressed by the fact that they were bumping off of my car in the windshield that I decided to drive south from there. So I drove down to the 401, and I was approaching Oshawa, and I saw a train idling over the 401 on the train bridge, and I decided to pull over and photograph it as it was a part of a new project that I was working on. So I pulled in, drove down Champlain Road to get to the bridge, and made my photographs and realized that I was too far away. So I pulled into a bowling alley that was right near there, and the parking lot was empty, and so I was right trackside, about 12 feet away from the tracks. They were elevated about 10 feet, so I didn't have a really great view, but good enough. So I was standing there waiting for the train to come, and every once in a while, a tree down the railroad tracks were a large flock of small black birds. Every once in a while, they would all fly out of the tree, and I thought that maybe the train was coming, but it wasn't. After a period of time, the birds flew out of the tree, and this time they didn't fly back into it, but they flew right in front of me. And I managed to trip the shutter on my camera and caught them as blurs going across the film. But what was interesting is that there was a large bush on my right side, and all of the birds flew into that bush. I saw that they were being chased by a hawk. But what was more remarkable about that event was, or I should say equally remarkable, was when I was standing there waiting and I looked up and I saw a monarch butterfly flying towards me, and he or she was accompanied by a dragonfly. They were flying side by side and so close to each other that they looked like they were having a conversation. They eventually flew by me, and I thought I'd never seen anything like that before. What was interesting too about being in that parking lot is that the whole world around there had disappeared. It was just kind of a quiet, warm summer day, and I wasn't aware of anything else. It was just, I thought I was dreaming, and I wasn't, because right after it happened, I wrote everything down. But it wasn't until after working on GardenShip and State with Patrick and with the artists that I realized that that event, what I had seen, was a waking dream that would lead to GardenShip and State, because it embodied the two flying next to each other, embodied the foundation for the churro in terms of two enemies that were flying next to each other and looked like they were talking. They were having a conversation. And of course, the churro goes back to 1613, when my ancestors were living in eastern New York State, and the Dutch were just establishing their colony. And this was a way, the treaty, some say the first treaty on Turtle Island, that was negotiated between the two, and that there was a sense of respecting one another, not intruding on one another, and living in peace. And of course, we know that didn't happen. But it wasn't long before everything had changed. And but the treaty, the idea behind it lived on. It lives today, and it was celebrated the 400th anniversary, and in 2013. So it was a very important event for Haudenosaunee people and for Indigenous people, and but it was what I brought to GardenShip and State was, how do we take a diverse group of artists that Patrick had assembled and find a way to work together as a community and bring in our diverse backgrounds into the project. Once the concept was introduced, I was surprised at how well it was received by everyone that was working on a project, and how it had an impact that continued to reverberate throughout the process, the curatorial process, to the writers that were invited to take part, not only as writers for the catalog, but as contributing to the exhibition as well. Everybody that was associated with it, that had been invited by Patrick, were invested in the overall project and for the theme of bringing a sense of I guess, friendship and respect into the project, and it lived through. And of course, it's something that will continue to grow. So I wanted to thank Patrick and for inviting me to take part in this project and to bring what I was raised to understand, and how we break down barriers in terms of the fundamental aspects that we can all embrace, which is a sense of peace and harmony with how we live within this environment, how we are a part of it, and how we need to respect our place in it. So that's about all I have to say at this point. So I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Actually, I'd like to give Jeff a hand. Join me. So good afternoon. It's so great to see you all here today, and thank you again, Jeff. So Jeff and I first met, as he alluded, more than 20 years ago. We were on an Ontario Arts Council jury in Toronto. And for me, it was really a singular meeting in which I recall that at that point, we talked about the Two-Row Treaty. And so it was a key subject of discussion, in part on the jury that we were involved in. So meeting Jeff helped me to shape my own recognition of the important role that artists and curators have to play if truths are to be told, creative and imaginative art is to be made, and meaningful change can continue to be possible. So in that spirit, over the past 3 years, as Jeff has said, through sometimes daily Zoom calls, he and I have talked about ways of meeting and working toward a common purpose as artists and curators. So this gathering is the synthesis, you could say, of a 3-year project, probably longer in so many ways, as Jeff alludes, GardenShip and State, and as Andrew has told us, began with this collaboration of 20 artists from across Turtle Island, although one is in fact located in the UK. And the majority are here today, and some on Zoom and most in person. And so I want to warmly welcome all of them back. And some came through sleet and snow, so thank you for doing that. And I really want to say you really are our community. In November 2019, we began our project with a workshop right here at Museum London and also at Western. And some of you who are joining us today were at that event. Following that, through hundreds of conversations in person and on Zoom among the artists, outreach to communities, and a vast amount of creative work, the group was able to produce the exhibition that has been alluded to by Andrew, but not without the amazing support of Andrew himself and the team at Museum London. Inhabiting Museum London's upstairs Ivy galleries, as well as the community gallery and the front lawn, the show invited our community to engage with issues of decolonial critique, environmental activism, and protest against government and industry complicity in the ongoing climate crisis. Fundamentally, I think the exhibition asked, how can we work together and create together as a global community to restore the planet while respecting differences and seeking to repair divisions and address injustices brought about by colonialism? With those questions in mind, the need to do some real work, the phases of GardenShip's timeline were aptly titled Seeding, Nurturing, Reaping, Harvesting, Transplanting. This was meant as a way to engage in an unfolding process likened to gardening and planting related practices. And while those stages were not exactly obvious, we weren't carrying around banners that said, this is about seeding. At times they resonated with what was really happening for the project and its participants. And I like to think that this weekend is one of those times, including because we'll be welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Lewis Williams, at the end of the afternoon. Lewis is an Indigenous feminist scholar, practitioner of Naga Te Rangi Maori descent, who's the founding director of the Alliance for Intergenerational Resilience, a Canadian-based international nonprofit organization whose aim is strengthening human ecological resilience through the resurgence of Indigenous knowledges and lifeways within all peoples. Her talk is entitled Living Well with Kin, and that's at the end of the afternoon. So we want to welcome all of you to the fertile and challenging world of gardenship and state. As our complex and rather poetic title suggests, this is a space that makes room for expansive ideas, compelling engagements with art, and generative curiosity. Besides the conversations and all that you'll encounter here, we're also going to be celebrating our 300-page publication that is the story of GardenShip, beautifully designed by Katie Wilhelm, who is here today, and expertly managed and edited by Ruth Skinner, who's also here today. It's filled with rich conversations and essays by the project's participants, which our presentations here today are going to echo. And we also invited a host of other friends to be involved in that publication, and some of them are here today. So that includes Nandi Bhatia, who actually can't be here today, but you'll hear from her from India. Richard Fung, who's a writer and artist, was one of the writing contributors, as well as Joanna Kerr, a museum and library professional, and also Dr. Nina Zitani, zoological curator from Western, and as well Andrew Kear, who you met earlier, provided an essay to the catalog. I'm almost done. Finally, today we want to especially focus on community building within and beyond gardenship and state. Our project has a legacy in the kinds of work by artists and activists within and connected with the London community that's happened here for decades. This is especially notable in the activities of Jamili Hassan and Ron Benner and the Embassy Cultural House, which has been such a significant partner for our project. That example, and sharing resources in general, and the embracing of the tenets of the Two-Row Treaty regarding peaceful coexistence, ultimately manifested in a variety of ways throughout the project. The Museum London exhibition, and especially the 4 initiatives that you're going to hear about now. Alongside the presentation today, which will be hosted by Michelle Wilson, who was the coordinator of the community projects, we have a GardenShip Almanac, which you're welcome to take. And there's also what's called the On-Site Journal, which was a co-publication between the Embassy Cultural House and GardenShip and State and On-Site Review. So those things are available. And all I want to say as I wrap up is we hope you truly enjoy the day. I will be here till around 6:30 today, and then we'll be starting again tomorrow at 11:30, just till 5, and we'll have a smudge by Dan and Mary Lou Smoke. And if you want longer bios, there's a QR code on the poster at the back, and you can have a look at those if you want to know even more than the 2 lines that the hosts will give you. So, to move along, I'm just going to introduce Michelle Wilson, who is the coordinator of the community projects, and then that program will begin. So Michelle's an artist and mother. In the Euro-American archive, the bodies of other animals are used to convey colonial knowledge systems. Their stories of survival are used to perpetuate myths of settler saviors. As a feminist of settler descent working in colonial institutions, this is the legacy that Wilson has inherited and is confronting. Michelle completed her PhD with a dissertation entitled Remnants, Outlaws, and Wallows, Practices for Understanding Bison in May 2022 at Western. She's currently a postdoctoral scholar with the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership at the University of Guelph. So I'll welcome Michelle up here to get the program going. Thank you.